After 48 days alone in the wilderness, a starving grizzly cub collapses in the forest, skin clinging to bone, eyes dull, barely breathing. Everyone thought he was gone. But fate had other plans. What happened next would break the hearts of rescuers, rewrite everything they thought they knew about animal resilience, and leave a scar, deep and beautiful, on one man's soul. This isn't a fairy tale. It's real. And it starts with one breath, when no one thought he'd take another. Before we begin, make sure to subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications. That way, we can keep bringing you true emotional stories from the wild that will stay with you long after the screen fades. The cub shouldn't have survived a week. He was no older than 6 months when the flash flood hit the valley, violent and sudden, washing away trails, uprooting trees, and scattering wildlife like leaves in the wind. His mother had fought to save him, witnesses said. But she was gone by the time rangers arrived, and he had vanished. For 48 days, no one saw him, not the hikers, not the researchers, not even the aerial drones scanning the burn-scarred forests after the flood. It was late July when a lone wildlife tracker, Daniel Reeve, found the first sign, claw marks, small and uneven, etched into a tree trunk near Bitter Creek. Then came the scat. Then fur, snagged on a branch. Still, no one believed it could be the same cub until Daniel saw the drag marks. And then, just ahead in the underbrush, movement. At first, he thought it was a coyote, maybe a wounded dog. But when he crept closer and parted the ferns, what he saw made his chest tighten. The cub was barely more than a skeleton, covered in mud, matted fur falling away in patches, ribs visible with every shallow breath. His eyes, once bright and brown, were sunken, dull, flickering like dying embers. His paws trembled as he tried to stand. And then, he collapsed. Daniel didn't move. He crouched, pulse pounding in his ears. A wild animal, even dying, could lash out in fear. But this cub didn't growl, didn't run. He simply lay there, broken. Very gently, Daniel reached into his pack, pulled out his emergency blanket, and covered the little body. It twitched weakly under the warmth. "You're not dying today," Daniel whispered. He radioed for help. No one believed him at first. A cub? After 48 days? No way, he's still breathing. But he was. And within 2 hours, a wildlife rescue team descended onto the ridge. As they carried the cub out on a makeshift stretcher, Daniel walked beside him. He didn't even know the cub's name. No one did. Not yet. But something inside him whispered, "You're not just a survivor. You're here for a reason." But could a starving cub, with no strength and no mother, find his way back to life? Or was it already too late? They rushed the cub to Clearwater Wildlife Rehabilitation Center, a modest but dedicated facility tucked deep in the pines of northern Montana. It was quiet, off the grid, built more for birds and foxes than a wild grizzly, especially one on the edge of death. Dr. Ava Kessler, head veterinarian and co-founder of the center, took one look at the cub and paled. His temperature's crashing. Heart rate's thready. "He hasn't had proper nutrition in weeks," she muttered. "We're not treating a bear. We're treating a ghost." They placed him under warming lamps, inserted 4 lines, and carefully removed ticks and thorns from his tiny, battered body. His breathing was shallow. His gums, pale. His eyes didn't track motion. Ava knew what this meant. But Daniel didn't leave the room. He stood by the edge of the observation window for hours, arms folded, eyes locked on the frail little cub who'd collapsed into his world and somehow, impossibly, stirred something inside him. Ava finally came out of the medical bay, gloves stained, her face unreadable. "I can't promise anything," she said. Daniel nodded. "I'm not asking for a promise. Just don't give up." The next 3 nights were a war. Ava and her team fought dehydration, infection, and starvation. They gave the cub glucose, antibiotics, electrolyte fluids. Every hour mattered. Twice, his vitals flatlined, only to restart on their own moments later. "He doesn't want to go," Ava said quietly. "He's fighting harder than I've ever seen." On the 4th night, Daniel was sitting outside the enclosure, head resting against the wall, when he heard a small sound, a breath. Then another. He looked up. The cub had opened one eye, slow, weak, but aware. Daniel leaned forward, barely breathing. The cub blinked. Then did something impossible. He lifted his head, just slightly, and looked straight at Daniel through the glass. It wasn't instinct. It wasn't survival reflex. It was recognition. The moment passed quickly. His head dropped again. But Daniel couldn't unsee it. "Hey there, tough guy," he whispered. "You're still with us." Ava came in later and found Daniel still there. "He's not just a rescue," Daniel said. "He found a way to stay alive. He chose it." Ava nodded slowly. "Then maybe we owe it to him to give him something to come back for." They gave him a name the next day, Finn. Short for final chance, someone joked. But to Daniel, it meant something more. It meant fighter. Finn had opened his eyes. But would he ever walk again? And what damage had 48 days alone truly done? By week 2, Finn could lift his head without trembling. He could drink warm goat's milk from a bottle, chew on soft fruit, and sit up for short periods with a thick blanket wrapped around his body. His fur was still patchy. His bones still sharp beneath the skin. But his eyes, those soft, deep brown eyes, had come back to life. He tracked movement now. He watched Ava's every step. And when Daniel entered the room, Finn would lift his head just a little higher, like he was saying, "I know you." Daniel hadn't planned to stay at Clearwater. He was a tracker, not a caretaker. But something about the cub, his story, his spirit, kept Daniel from leaving. Every morning, he'd show up at the clinic before sunrise, sit near Finn's enclosure, and talk to him while sipping his thermos of bitter coffee. Day 12, he'd whisper, "You've already outlived every prediction." Sometimes he'd tell stories about trails he'd hiked, bears he'd seen, close calls with mountain lions. And Finn listened. It made no logical sense. But he did. He'd tilt his head, stare, grumble softly when Daniel paused too long. Ava noticed the bond forming. "He reacts more to you than anyone else," she said. "Even me." Daniel shrugged. "Maybe it's guilt. I've seen cubs out there. Most don't make it. Maybe this time I just couldn't let go." Then came the test. Ava decided to move Finn into a semi-outdoor enclosure, still protected, but with natural light, soil, and a bit more space to move. "We need to see if he'll stand. If he can't regain motor control, there's no future for him in the wild," she said carefully. The transfer happened at dawn. Daniel was there, of course. Finn looked unsure as he was gently lifted and placed onto the earth floor of the new pen. For a moment, he just lay there, breathing heavily, eyes scanning the open space. Then Daniel crouched near the fence. "Come on, Finn. You've made it this far." Finn looked toward him, wobbled, and with a trembling groan, stood. It wasn't graceful. His legs shook. He nearly toppled over. But he was standing. Daniel felt something swell in his chest, relief, pride, and something deeper. The kind of awe that only comes when you realize you're watching a miracle take its first real breath. From that day forward, things changed. Finn began to walk short distances. He'd nose around the rocks, splash in a shallow tub of water, even grunt in protest when feeding time came late. He was becoming a bear again. But with every step forward, a shadow loomed behind. Ava had received a letter from the State Wildlife Agency. The cub is to be assessed for permanent captivity or humane euthanasia if release is deemed impossible. She hadn't told Daniel yet. Finn was fighting harder every day. But would the system give him a chance to finish the fight? The official from the state arrived in a clean white truck with tinted windows and a clipboard that said more than his mouth ever would. His name was Leonard Tate, Wildlife Management Division. He shook Ava's hand, ignored Daniel. "I'm here to assess the viability of the specimen for long-term integration or relocation," he said flatly, already scribbling notes. Ava bristled. "You mean the cub?" But Leonard wasn't listening. He was already walking toward the enclosure where Finn was sleeping in a nest of dry hay and shredded cloth, one paw curled beneath his chin. "He's awake during daylight?" "Yes," Ava replied. "Feeding himself with supervision. Mobility improving daily." Leonard frowned. "Still limping." Daniel finally spoke. "He was half dead 16 days ago. He's alive now because he fought for every breath. That limp isn't weakness. It's survival." Leonard looked at him, unimpressed. "We don't base policy on emotion, Mr. Reeve." Daniel Reeve. The tracker who pulled him out of the woods. Leonard turned back to his clipboard. "We'll proceed with the standard 48-hour observation. Then the board will decide." That night, Daniel didn't leave the facility. He sat beside Finn's enclosure long after Ava went home, listening to the wind outside, running his hands through his hair in frustration. Finn wandered over to the edge of the fence, nosed at the gate. Daniel looked at him, voice low. "They don't see you." "Not really. Just a case. A number in a system." Finn gave a soft grunt and nudged the gate again, harder this time. Daniel laughed quietly. "You trying to make a break for it?" The cub huffed, then did something unexpected. He sat, eyes locked on Daniel, waiting. The next day, Leonard returned with 2 assistants and a tranquilizer kit. "What are you doing?" Ava asked sharply. "Final check. Blood work. Joint stress test. Standard protocol." Daniel stood between them and the cage. "You can do it without the dart." Leonard raised an eyebrow. "And risk injury?" "We're not sentimental out here." Daniel didn't move. "Try," he said, "and you'll have to explain why a state worker tranquilized a recovering cub against vet orders, on video." He pointed to the small camera in the corner of the enclosure, blinking red. Leonard froze. Ava stepped forward. "You've seen the footage. He's improving. He's bonding. He's alive. If you put him down now, it's not policy. It's laziness." Leonard's jaw tensed. He lowered the tranquilizer. "This isn't over," he muttered, then turned and walked out. That night, Ava sat with Daniel in the hallway outside Finn's room. "They want to send him to a sanctuary in another state," she said. "Permanent captivity." Daniel stared ahead. "He deserves more than that." He's not just a cub. Ava nodded slowly. Then we'll have to prove it. If Finn was going to stay free, they'd need more than survival. They'd need a miracle and evidence. The morning was cold, gray, and quiet. Too quiet. Daniel stood in the center of a controlled wildlife evaluation field, arms crossed, staring at the gates ahead. Beyond them lay a quarter-acre training habitat, natural terrain, trees, a running stream, and a tracking path set up by Ava and her team. This was Finn's test. Today, Ava had said, he has to prove he can survive on his own. Not just live, but be a bear. Finn had come a long way. He was stronger now, eating solid food, climbing small structures, even swatting playfully at leaves and insects like any healthy cub would. But this test wasn't about play. This test was about freedom. Leonard Tate stood nearby, clipboard in hand, stone-faced. Two wildlife board officials watched from a distance. The test begins when the subject enters the habitat, Leonard announced. He has 60 minutes to demonstrate self-sufficiency markers, environmental awareness, foraging instinct, threat response, and directional memory. Daniel whispered under his breath, he's not a lab rat. But Finn didn't wait for permission. As soon as the gate opened, the cub stepped forward, head high, body steady. The first few minutes were hesitant. Finn sniffed the air, padded slowly toward a cluster of rocks, and paused. Then something clicked. His muscles shifted. His nose went to the ground, and he moved with intent. He followed a scent trail planted by Ava, a buried fruit cache under pine needles. He found it within minutes and used his paws to uncover it. No hesitation. He scaled a small incline, splashed into the stream, shook water off his coat. Daniel felt his heart swell. "That's it, buddy," he whispered. "Show them who you are." Then came the final marker, a simulated predator call. A low recorded growl played from a hidden speaker. Finn froze. The officials tensed. Daniel gripped the fence. The cub sniffed the air, turned his head, and calmly backed away, keeping his eyes on the sound. He didn't panic. He didn't freeze. He reacted like an animal with instinct. He disappeared into the trees, briefly circled around, and returned from the opposite side. Leonard's pen stopped moving. At minute 54, Finn sat near the center of the field and looked toward the observation deck. Right at Daniel. No fear. No confusion. Just calm. "I've never seen anything like it," one of the officials murmured. Ava stepped forward, voice steady. "He's not just surviving. He's ready." Leonard said nothing. But for the first time, he didn't argue. That evening, Daniel sat beside Finn's enclosure as the light faded into amber. "You did it," he said, voice soft. "You showed them." Finn pressed his nose to the fence, not clawing, not begging. Just there. With him. Together. Ava came in quietly, holding a sealed envelope. "The board's decision," she said. Daniel took it, heart pounding. He opened it, read the first line, then exhaled, long, deep, broken. Approved for release. But freedom comes with a price. And sometimes, letting go is the hardest part of all. They set the release date for the end of the month. It gave Daniel 2 weeks, 14 days to prepare, 14 days to say goodbye. But how do you say goodbye to something that saved you from your own silence? Because that's what Finn had done. Before the cub, Daniel's life had been drifting, day to day, job to job, alone but pretending not to care. But watching Finn crawl out of the edge of death and fight his way back, it changed everything. Clearwater Center cleared a large zone near the base of Wild Pine Ridge where Finn would be reintroduced. The land was protected, full of fresh water, natural food, and monitored from a distance. If he could make it there through the first month, he'd have a shot at a full wildlife. Daniel visited the site every other day, setting up markers, reviewing maps, studying known bear migration paths. Ava joined him once, silent most of the way. "You think he'll remember you?" she asked as they sat under a cedar. "I think he already does," Daniel said. Ava looked down. "You ready to let him go?" He hesitated, then almost in a whisper, "No. But that doesn't matter. He earned this." Back at Clearwater, Finn had become stronger than ever. His coat had filled in. He'd gained weight. He was eating entirely on his own and sleeping curled up like any healthy bear his age. But his personality had changed too. He was more independent now, less reliant on Daniel's presence. Still aware. Still connected. But something wild had returned to his eyes. It was working. He was leaving. On their last night together, Daniel sat inside Finn's enclosure just once, quiet and still. No cameras, no staff, just the two of them. He didn't speak for a while, then softly. "You gave me something I didn't know I'd lost," he said. "Purpose. Connection. A reason to fight." Finn lay beside him, head resting on his paw, chest rising and falling slowly. Daniel pulled something from his coat pocket, a strip of leather, worn and frayed. "It was my father's," he said, placing it near the bear. "For luck." Finn sniffed it gently, then lay his head down again, eyes closing. It was enough. The next morning, the sun rose early. The gate was opened. The handlers stepped back, and Finn walked out, calm, strong, silent. He didn't run. He didn't pause. But just before he disappeared into the tree line, he stopped, turned, and looked back. Not for long, just enough. Daniel raised a hand, barely able to keep it steady. Then Finn vanished into the woods. Ava stood beside him. "You okay?" Daniel wiped his eyes, then smiled, truly smiled for the first time in years. "Yeah," he said. "Because he is." Finn was free. But what happens when a bond is real, and the wild still remembers? It had been nearly a year since Finn disappeared into the trees. Daniel kept working for Clearwater, but he rarely spoke of the bear anymore. Not because he forgot, how could he, but because the story had grown so sacred, so deeply carved into him, that saying it out loud felt like breaking something fragile. He'd visit Wild Pine Ridge once a month, hiking the same release path, checking the trail cams, watching from afar. Ava told him it wasn't healthy, that maybe it was time to move on. But Daniel wasn't waiting to see Finn again. He just needed to know he was still out there, alive, wild, free. It was early spring when the call came. A camera trap had triggered a few miles from the ridge, images of a lone young male grizzly crossing a ridge trail. Healthy. Large. Strong. But with something odd in the photo, a strip of leather caught in the claws of his front paw. Daniel's chest seized. He knew that leather. It had once been a charm around his own wrist. He'd left it for Finn on their final night together. He didn't wait. The next morning, Daniel was hiking before the sun crested the mountains. It took hours. He didn't stop. He followed fresh claw marks. A shallow bed crushed into the pine needles. A tree trunk rubbed clean from scratching. Every sign said the same thing: Finn was close. Daniel reached the ridge as the light turned golden, cutting through the trees in long, warm shafts. He stepped into a clearing and froze. At the far end, standing with his head low, was Finn, bigger, stronger, wiser, but unmistakably him. They stared at each other across a breathless stillness. Neither moved. Daniel swallowed hard. "You remember me?" he asked, barely louder than the breeze. Finn didn't growl. Didn't flee. He walked forward, slowly, deliberately. Within 20 feet, he stopped and huffed, a soft, low sound that hit Daniel like a thunderclap. It was the same sound he'd made in the enclosure, in the tent, that day in the field. Daniel's eyes filled with tears. He knelt, never breaking eye contact. "Good to see you, buddy," he whispered. Finn stepped a few feet closer, then without ceremony turned back toward the trees, but not before dropping something in the grass. Daniel walked to where the bear had stood. There, half buried in pine needles, was the strip of leather, worn, tooth-marked, but intact. A gift. A memory. A full circle. That night, Daniel sat alone by a fire near the trailhead, not sad, not grieving, just full. And on the back of a scrap of notebook paper, he scribbled words that would stay with him forever. Sometimes the wild gives back. Not in words. Not in promises. But in recognition. In return. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe and hit that like button. Share it with someone who believes in second chances, silent bonds, and the wild strength of survival. Because even after 48 days alone, some spirits refuse to break.